to us it seemed like the left and the right were just in a big slanging match.
Yeah.
Middle Australia had kind of checked out, and that a lot of the language was dehumanizing, and you know, that if you infect a community with fear of the other, you don't know whether that person you're seeing on the street is a person seeking asylum or a international student or a tourist, or in fact if they've been here more generations than your own family has. And
right.
So not only was it about this idea of the cruelty visited upon people who had come here to ask for safety, but also the way that the debate was eroding our social cohesion and teaching Australians to fear people who are different to them.
You're listening to Justice Matters with Tim Buxton, a podcast inspiring the fight for a world where everyone belongs. I'm so glad you've joined me for another episode of Justice Matters. Today's guest is Brad Chilcott, and he is the Executive Director of White Ribbon Australia. Now, this is part of a global movement to end gender-based violence, and in particular, violence by men against women and girls. And let me tell you this, the domestic violence issue in Australia is growing at an alarming rate. And as Brad was sharing with me some of the statistics here in Australia, it really sobered me. And I have to say, I really commend Brad for his courage and for his leadership in tackling this issue head on. Now, formerly, Brad was a school chaplain and a Pentecostal pastor. Now, his faith really has driven him to fight injustice throughout his whole life and career. And he really has a heart to build a more inclusive society. You know, back when the Australian government had the policy to stop the boats, and it was at the peak of that policy, Brad decided to step out and create an initiative called Welcoming Australia. And really this is a movement to create a culture of welcome, a place where people from all backgrounds have equal opportunity to belong and contribute and thrive here. And that's one of the things I love about Brad. He really embodies that within his life and within his work. I'm so glad I was able to have this conversation with Brad, and I'm even more grateful to be able to share it with you today. Well, Brad, thank you so much for carving out some time to jump on this podcast with me. It's been a bit of back and forth to try and get you. We're so close up here in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago, but we weren't able to make the connection. But thank you so much, mate. I know it's been a busy few weeks for making the time.
Oh, it's fantastic to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Brad, I mean, this is kind of our first kind of face-to-face where I've seen you. We've emailed and corresponded and chatted back and forth for a little bit. But it's kind of interesting. Just I was, getting to know a bit about you through mutual friends that we have. Cameron, who I met in New York, who's just been raving about you and saying, Tim, you've just got to meet Brad. You got to connect. You guys just sound so similar, and I've just done a lot of similar work. And so when I discovered that you're an Adelaide fan, I was crossing my fingers that it was the Adelaide Crows fan and not a Port fan. But lo and behold, I've got
the power. The power,
I managed to get a Port Adelaide fan on. But we kind of slightly breaking the rules for my first season, which is to get people that are really close friends of mine. But I figure if I'm going to break those rules a little bit, it'll be for you, because you've come with high praise from real dear friends of mine, and both here up on the Gold Coast where I am, and like I mentioned, Cameron. And so, mate, really appreciate just following your journey. But I've got to take it back to a little bit here. I hear you have you've had, at least, I don't know if it still remains, a passion for punk music. Is that right?
Well, I would never say punk. I would say like grunge, and like in the early days of my musical journey, beyond the stuff my parents brought me up on, which was horrible. Like the Seekers were edgy for them.
Was Amy Grant allowed, and anybody
Amy Grant
else?
was allowed.
Yeah. Okay.
There was a Roy Orbison.
Okay.
I can do that a little bit.
Classic.
But anyway, I really got into the grunge scene, Nirvana, Sonic Youth, Soundgarden, that kind of stuff, and yeah. So I like some punk music. I'm really into Idols at the moment. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're out of the UK. They're a bit noise rock,
edgy,
punk, but they're really political in a good way.
Yeah.
That so
kind of like Rage Against the Machine in a way, that anti-establishment.
Yeah, so, well, a lot of pro multiculturalism, a lot of I guess gender equality and workers' rights, but without it being like annoying preachy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, music is so powerful, isn't it? I brought that up because my cousin's husband, I think I got that right, was a part of the Christian punk rock band Seraph's Coal. I don't know if you remember that.
I went to their reunion show recently.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
So Sam, the guitarist, is my cousin's husband. So
right.
I remember when I visited Adelaide, I'd get to go hang out with them and go to their shows, and yeah.
So I used to run a big festival in Adelaide, and back when I was early 20s, and had a lot of the Christian scene play at the festival.
Sure.
Seraph's never played, but I used to go to a lot of their shows, and like that kind of punk music is not my style, but the energy at their shows is just ridiculous.
Next level,
and even
right?
At this reunion, it was everyone back together again after 20 years. There was no less energy, just as much.
How good's that?
Circle pits and
the circle pits. Oh my gosh, it's so good.
It was amazing to be there, and great to see a whole lot of people I hadn't seen for a couple of decades.
Oh, so good. Oh man, I do remember when they put that up there. It was pre-COVID lockdown, so there probably was a chance I could have made it, but I miss Adelaide. I miss the good memories I had there growing up there as a wee kid. So you've kind of, mate, you've been on an incredible journey. It seems throughout your life, and that passion for, I guess, fighting for the rights of others, especially the underserved, and those just seems to be resonant within every decision you've made, whether it be in your career, younger as a school chaplain, and even in the roles you've played in religious circles as a pastor as well. I've just really appreciated that for you. But can you trace back? Is there like what made Brad? What made you so passionate about this, which has obviously led you to found Welcoming Australia, which works with refugees and asylum seekers and culturally and linguistically diverse peoples, as well as now your current role with White Ribbon Australia. Is there defining moments growing up for you, or is it just something that kind of progressively happened?
It certainly progressively happened, but it came a bit out of frustration. Like growing up, I grew up in a very conservative church, very conservative faith community, Christian Brethren, it's called. When I was really young in our church, women weren't allowed to speak, had to wear head coverings.
Wow.
And that faith community moved on a little from that, but it was still very patriarchal and exclusionary to women. A lot of attitudes around people of other faiths and cultures. Definitely no acceptance of diverse sexualities or genders. But what actually, those things weren't really front of mind for me back then. But what really started to make me think was a lot of the rhetoric in the faith communities I grew up in was about the massive impact this church was going to have on the city, and we're going to change the city and change the world and make a big difference. And I could almost never see any difference beyond the fact that maybe some more people showed up on a Sunday and maybe dropped some more money in the tin.
In the tin, yeah.
Yeah, and in this church growing up, I started running the youth group when I was 18, and we quickly, when it started, it was mostly church kids, and then by the time I'd finished, we had 100 or so kids, but most of them were not part of a church community at all.
Yeah,
and it exposed me to, I guess, to reality is maybe a simple way of putting it, to understand that these kids were dealing with things in their families and in their personal lives that I guess I started to think, and in those early days this was not fully formed, but started to think the difference that we're going to make or that we exist for surely goes beyond everything will be fine if these people come to church.
Right.
Which seems to be kind of the only conclusion that we come to. If they come to church and join our faith community and find Jesus, whatever that means, then everything will be okay. But actually these problems were systemic and cultural and, required structural sociological change if they were going to have their struggles alleviated. And so to me, it wasn't enough to say that we loved people and therefore we would try and get them a ticket to heaven when they die.
Right.
Actually, love should look like making life flourish.
Better for others, yeah.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I kind of hear, I think in many respects we probably had similar upbringings from a faith perspective, and what I kind of hear you saying is that if as long as people come to the prayer meeting and pray and do the religious things, let's say, then it kind of, we don't really have to get our hands dirty in maybe some of the more political or the more social and even let's just the business, the corporate world of things, in order to see that change occur. Is that kind of what I'm
kind
hearing?
of and it was a growing understanding of the difference between charity and justice, I think.
Okay.
Like if if people, it's pretty basic, but if people are hungry and you keep feeding them, that's great, but have you asked the question about why they're hungry in the first place when the rest of us are wealthy and fed? And love, I think, drives you to do more than just, keep giving handouts and making people, symptom alleviation. Love would actually say, how do we get rid of the disease, which is a structural, systemic issue, not just a individual charity issue.
It's an empowerment issue, really. Where does the power lie, and how do we make sure that everyone has equal opportunity, right?
And how do we use our power and privilege? And I think that it was, to me, just started to become a cop-out that we can say that we love people but exclude people, say that we love people but be apathetic about the justice issues that impact their lives, say that we love people but support neoliberalism and capitalism and consumerism, all the things that are kind of result in people's exploitation and disenfranchisement and disempowerment. And so, it just started asking me, it caused me to start asking lots of questions about the faith that I grew up in. And, in and this, as you said, has been quite a long journey. So I'm
Yeah.
cherry picking a little bit, but
Well, I'm kind of
it also
curious
just
too.
didn't.
Yeah, just to see how whether it becomes just a faith challenge at one point, and then how does that then merge into some of the other issues? But yeah, sorry, cut you off
No,
there.
that's okay. It to me, in terms of my faith roots, to me, none of that added up to anything like the life of Jesus that you read about in Scripture as well. So we had this
Wow.
church, and I'm not just talking about the church I grew up in, but churches that, in general,
Yeah.
have created a new religion when Jesus was actually trying to dismantle religion, and so a new system of who's in, who's out,
Right.
what behaviors do you have to mimic in order to stay in the
In group.
in group and stay in God's good books. And actually, that's exactly what Jesus was dismantling.
Right.
So we were like, all right, we'll scrap the old religion and add Jesus, and then build it back up again, just the way it was.
Wow. And is that kind of what led you to the formation of Activate Church, a church that you were pastoring and a part of?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that has continued to form since Activate. I think at the beginning it was still actually a bit of a mirror of unhealthy religion.
Yeah.
But the idea was, so I went from the Brethren Church through the Uniting Church and then into a kind of Pentecostal experience. The short summary of why that was is our Brethren is really intellectual, academic, know the answers to the questions about the Bible. And I thought, sure, it's good to know the answers, but maybe if there is a God, then maybe you can experience that God. But then when I was in that movement, I found that triumphalism that I mentioned earlier about changing the world was even heightened to another degree.
Wow.
But still, where was the social analysis of the changing the structures that caused oppression and suffering? So if we're going to change anything, maybe it should be all of the systems that cause people to suffer.
But, it takes a lot more time, I would say. It takes a lot more... it's like a paleontologist kind of really having to go carefully and dig right deep down, right, to really get to the roots. I mean, my last job that I had in the States was with the Poverty Alleviation Organization, and it was focused primarily on using a program that would go in not as outsiders having the answers, but how to elevate their voices so that they realize they have the solutions, and they actually probably have the resources too. It's not like we are the ones that have the resources and we're coming here to help you, and this is in a more developing context world, because you can see the same principle of charity and world aid has just wrecked countries and continents. Essentially, Africa is a perfect example of how we've gone in and really quite often tried to help and actually destroyed with our charity business, enterprises, you could say. And so, but it takes a lot more hard work to go in and do the slow work of how we're going to go in and listen, how we're going to make sure they really feel like they're empowered to lead the charge, to make the change. That is not, it means we don't feel as good about ourselves because look what I've done, look what I gave, look how I helped, kind of thing. It's a lot harder.
So when I started Activate, what was driving me then, I guess, was I used to say a lot, surely if this guy Jesus was the Son of God and came to earth and died, was crucified, surely he didn't do all of that so that we could build buildings to sing in and have some bloke talk to us every Sunday and then go back to our normal lives of consuming and living for ourselves, and come back next Sunday for another pep talk. Surely it's more than that.
Wow. Wow, Brad, that's eye-opening.
So at the beginning, I wanted to create we called it right from the start a community of activists as the tagline, and the idea was behind it was not measuring success by what happens on a Sunday, but by the difference we're making to humans in the real world.
Wow.
And I don't think we did that super successfully at the beginning, but I think just the fact that we had that as our purpose gave us a bit of a different way of measuring our or
Impact,
prioritizing
yeah.
our activity and our energy. And so that was that I guess came out of the trajectory of my faith journey up to that point.
I mean, I really like to honor the fact that it is a journey, like we're all learning and growing. And, you know, hopefully as we develop and learn and grow and change our views, maybe politically or in, you know, as we develop and grow in our faith or whatever the case might be, it is a journey. And it is, I think we never, like, I don't have it all together. I feel like even this podcast is an opportunity for me to reconnect with people that in so many areas are so far along the journey than I am. And I really want to dig deep and listen and hopefully help other people that this is a safe place to actually come and be like, oh, okay, I'd never thought about that. And, you know, it's all part, I think, too, of learning to be more, you know, for me, it's that the Jesus way is that upside down kind of kingdom, right? That upside down way of Matthew 5, where he just lays it all out and said it's actually the poor that are blessed, and it's the opposite way to the way it seems like this world is operating, which is exploiting, and understanding how we can be we are complicit in that in our ways, maybe unbeknownst, but how also I think it gives us that awareness, gives us the opportunity, well, we can actually now do something about it. And so, yeah, man, I don't like to ever, I think when I look back on my own journey, it's like, I probably was doing the best at the time with what I had, but I'm glad I'm learning to dig deeper. And Justice Matters is brought to you by You Belong. If you'd like to learn more about their work, empowering refugees to integrate and thrive in Australia, head on over to youbelong.org.au. There you'll find ways to get involved, volunteer, and financially get behind the several initiatives they've got going on. There's also a stack of articles and blogs that you'll find there that are really informative and engaging. Now, did you know this podcast is actually a video podcast featured on YouTube? Just search Justice Matters TV on YouTube and watch each episode right there. And while you're there, hit subscribe and get notified each time a new video drops. If I haven't already got personal with you already, I hope you don't mind if we take it even a next level, because I know for you, your family is no stranger to suffering. It's no stranger to really kind of walking through a tough journey. One of the greatest accomplishments you shared with me was that your son reached the age of 13 years of age just recently, and I saw the disco party that you guys threw at your house. That looked like an awesome rave. But he's obviously your journey with him too has kind of been public at some point and moments. Do you mind sharing a bit about that journey and maybe even how that journey itself has kind of influenced you to continue to kind of, pursue hard the need to serve the underserved, and advocate for others?
So when my wife Rachel was pregnant with Harry, we were told that he wouldn't survive the pregnancy.
Really?
And at our first ultrasound, they looked at all of the fluid that should have been around the baby was trapped inside Harrison.
Wow.
And so so basically they said there's no chance of this baby surviving. And we said, "Oh, is there anything that you could do at this point?" And they said, "There's one operation that could increase the chance to 1%."
Oh
And
my.
so we thought, okay, well, we'll take that. We'll do that operation because we don't want to spend the rest of our life wondering which way this could go. And so we did the operation. And then right up until the delivery, the doctors and midwives were telling us that he wouldn't survive, that his lungs were not formed, and a bunch of other issues. And even a fortnight before Rach gave birth, the midwife said, "You need to prepare yourself for a birth and then for a funeral." And
Wow.
so then Harry came along, and he came out alive. After, he was intubated and started to breathe, which they didn't think was possible.
Wow.
And then he was rushed straight off to surgery to address a couple of issues. And yeah, since that date, he was born with a quarter of one kidney and no other kidney. So just
Oh my.
He had about 17% kidney function for most of his life. And so up to this point, he's had 25 surgical procedures, and I guess the biggest one was me giving him a kidney 4.5 years ago. And that has, changed the trajectory of his life. Obviously, he needed a kidney, but it also comes with its own challenges. The anti-rejection drugs take out your immune system, and so he gets sick all the time, and then in hospital because if you don't, address the infection quickly, it impacts on the kidney that's now inside and becomes a bit of a cycle. So we're very used to hospital, kind of a second home. But Harry is incredible, and he's giving his first proper stand-up comedy show this Sunday in a pub at 13.
No way! Oh my gosh!
So,
he's given up the Adelaide Oval as a venue.
It's at a pub in the city with some other comedians, but a great opportunity for him.
Oh man!
And most people, if they met him at first, wouldn't realise he's got some physical challenges going on and the sickness. He's very he's incredibly intelligent and witty and also confident. But yeah, he does. He was in hospital 10 days ago for 4 days and regularly admitted into hospital. So that's an ongoing challenge for us. And especially when my work has meant a lot of travel and being away from family, it is another thing that we really juggle as a family together.
I mean, it must be hard because your work is dedicated to trying to serve others in a certain way, but then you've got to weigh up. Look, my family is important too, right? And I could only imagine and the blessing you could say it is to be in Australia, to have a health care system and to have the opportunity to do that. Even some of those things we kind of can quite often take for granted, can't we?
Well, I mean, I think that just speaks to the very reason why I do what I do, in the sense that thanks to the activism and advocacy of people in the past in Australia, we have a system that means the millions of dollars that have been spent on my son's health is just an assumption that we have that as a right in Australia.
Say that again. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And all around the world, they don't have that right or that assumption. And Harry would not have survived in 90% of countries around the world, and if he was born to families in Cambodia, where I spend a lot of time,
right,
there's no way that he would have survived. In particular, financially, like they wouldn't be able to afford the medical costs of the operations and the medicine and all the things that give Harry his well-being and standard of living. And so my opinion about all of that is that we have a responsibility to use whatever power and privilege we have to fight on behalf of or alongside those who have less.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I think the message of the story of Jesus' life is as well, is that you use whatever power and privilege you have to try and achieve that for others, and that's what I want to spend my life doing.
Oh, Brad, I can see it, and I've seen that in the journey you referenced there, that you spent some time in Cambodia. Is that can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, sure.
And,
When I went to Vietnam on a trip with a church that I was working at in Wollongong, this must be 12 years ago now. And, we saw some quite horrific poverty and situations in Vietnam as well. But then we went to Cambodia for 2 days at the end, more intended as a holiday. And when we crossed over into Cambodia, first I heard on the radio the dictator Hun Sen saying, I better win this next election or it's going to be like Pol Pot all over again, like making threats like that on national radio.
My goodness.
And then I was along the riverfront and was sitting in a cafe where there was a sign that said, if you see child abuse, report it on this number. And a middle-aged Australian man sitting holding hands with a young Cambodian boy right next to that sign. And, and I saw many things like that just in these 2 days that made my skin crawl. And for whatever reason, I thought this is a place that I care about and want to use some of my privilege to help. And in those days, I hadn't fully, there's probably still some, like all of us have, some white savior mentality going on.
Sure.
But I tried to spend some time, learning from people and listening a lot about what is good development practice and community engagement and, all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, the short story is we ended up partnering with a local community that they're Khmer people, but they established a school for stateless Vietnamese
wonderful
kids. And so now the main involvement that I have there is that we fund the staff and materials and we built this school, the physical school as well.
Really?
It's all run locally. We don't make decisions about how it's run. We just provide the resources. But about 100 stateless kids that wouldn't otherwise have zero education go to that school.
Really?
And then we fund, I think at the moment it's 12 kinship foster placements for Khmer and Vietnamese kids, which is instead of kids ending up in a institution or an orphanage, they're placed with aunties, uncles, grandparents.
Wow.
But those people themselves couldn't really afford to take an extra person into the house, so we provide them with resource for food and clothing and school fees and all of that. So I visit every year usually, and we won't be this year, obviously.
Yeah, it might be a little tough. Well, I love how education is one of the most critical components, isn't it, to that whole raising people up. It's not, it really, focusing on providing education, especially for those that wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity. Educating girls in particular, there's a lot of research today that just shows the incredible impact that has on a whole community.
Yeah, and we took some wrong turns before we got to that partnership, and working with some dodgy, very well-known charities and things that were really colonialist and unhelpful. But I'm really happy that we work with locals who they make the decisions, they do the work, they know their community best. It just so happens that we have more financial resource than they do, and they have the
Sure.
skills to serve their community that we don't have. So, and the cool thing, I guess, how it connects to some of my other work
Yeah.
is Khmer people don't tend. This is a generalization, obviously, but
Sure.
don't tend to embrace the Vietnamese stateless people that are living on their land. And so working with these Khmer people who have a real partnership and heart for that community is also good to see, and build that kind of intercultural
Right.
connectivity as well.
Oh, it's fascinating, mate. I'd love to come with you one day. I was actually born in Indonesia, and I haven't been back there since I was born, and have had a real desire to kind of head back to Southeast Asia. So yeah, it'd be a real treat. And I guess that just flows into, where I kind of first connected with you, Brad, and where I was when I first moved back to Australia. Our mutual friend Cameron was sharing with me about you. I reached out to you a long time ago. I don't know if you even remember that.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and I was like gutted because, I really wanted to still be living with my family in northern Iraq, and my wife had fallen pregnant with baby number 4, and we'd come back, and we just were at that kind of point of what do we do, and we discovered that there were, Yazidi, Iraqi and Syrians that were coming, coming into Australia now. My heart just went out to them. The language and the culture is something I'd learnt to a certain degree, and just so I started helping and serving out there, and I just really in many respects was trying to model a lot of what we were starting out on, what you had founded in South Australia years earlier with Welcoming Australia. Do you mind spending a few minutes just sharing about that? Because that's, for me, that's really, really kind of where I've really kind of watched a lot of, what you've done, and really appreciated it.
Yeah, so we, where to begin? Well, what was the catalyst for starting Welcoming Australia was when the federal government was opening the Inverbrackie detention centre outside of Adelaide. And locals around Inverbrackie protested against the centre, but not because it was incarcerating innocent men, women and children, but because house prices would go down and crime would go up, and there might be terrorists and all of that.
Wow.
And there was an image on the news of a 10-year-old white Aussie kid holding up a sign that said "Sink the boats." And when I saw that, I thought, no matter what you think about Australia's policy on this issue, something has gone desperately wrong in our culture and in our national conversation that a parent would send their child out in public with that sign and think it's okay. And so we did, a couple of friends and I thought about it a little bit, and thought about in a very uneducated way at the time, but thought about what it felt like as an onlooker, I guess, of this public debate. And to us, it seemed like the left and the right were just in a big slanging match.
Yeah.
Middle Australia had kind of checked out, and that a lot of the language was dehumanizing, and that if you infect a community with fear of the other, you don't know whether that person you're seeing on the street is a person seeking asylum or a international student or a tourist, or in fact if they've been here more generations than your own family has. And
Right.
so not only was it about this idea of the cruelty visited upon people who had come here to ask for safety, but also the way that the debate was eroding our social cohesion and teaching Australians to fear people who are different to them. And so we decided that we wanted to create, I guess, a movement that, yes, would address this the politics of fear and cruelty and the policies that stem from that, but also would just cultivate a culture of welcome in which any person of any background could flourish and belong and thrive in our communities. And I guess we wanted to start that in a way that recognised that we could scream at each other about policy forever and no one's heart is changed. But when you sit with someone, hear their story, know them as a person, see your own hopes and dreams reflected back to you in person of another culture or faith or backgrounds, then something starts to shift and you start to want to do whatever you can to help that person. So, it's impossible to continue to dehumanize them once you've seen your own humanity
in them.
And so that was kind of the genesis of it, and it was very relational and positive. We wanted to be relentlessly positive about the Australia that could be.
I love it in the name. It's a statement, isn't it? It is who we are. It's not, ultimately, right? Who we know.
But we also wanted it to be, I guess, a good entry point into thinking about these issues. So I get one of the kind of catchphrases was new voices speaking to new audiences, using an old message but in a new frame. That was kind of the strategy. But, we'd all heard on the news the Greens or whoever else saying their thing, and, a thing that we believed, but that wasn't bringing in new people. But imagine if you had the Wiggles or your favourite football player or, someone from the mainstream speaking to a new audience with a frame that they could engage with rather than, send the immigration minister to The Hague kind of thing. That hopefully we would bring a new group of people into the movement and be able to create change in that way.
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of courage in you for that, because it's hard to kind of lead the way in it, because I don't know if it's been your story, but what has it been like, if I could ask it? What has your experience been like when you've kind of tried to lead the way into maybe taking some what people would think are, that's so left and progressive, and but trying to lead that whole gaping middle? What's that experience been? How what are the challenges have you had in that? And I'd love to hear your experiences on it.
It's an interesting place I've often found myself, because if you take welcoming Australia as an example, on one hand there's people that think way too progressive, but there was plenty of people thinking that we were compromisers and way too soft and not progressive enough.
How do you please everyone kind of thing? You can't.
And then with Activate, we left our denomination to be affirming of the LGBTIQ plus community, and we have in our pastoral team people in same-sex marriages, and we've been very public about that, and hoping that other faith communities follow that lead. And that obviously has been way too progressive for a whole lot of people.
Sure.
But then the left often think, well, you're still a Christian, so you must be dodgy in there, not progressive enough in there somewhere. So often we've find myself in the middle there in a strange way where, I think if you analysed my policy positions, I'd be more left than most people I know.
Yeah. Well,
But,
you're always right of somebody else and left of
yeah.
somebody else. So it's kind of one of those anomalies sometimes, isn't it? It all depends on who you're talking to, but
But a lot of it is about assumptions.
exact and labels, right? So
Yeah.
the person that thinks, well, my experience of Christianity growing up was maybe XYZ, Catholics, la da da. And so their assumptions that they bring to the table as well. If you call yourself Christian, then my assumption is this is kind of what it is. And it kind of comes down to, that's the challenge, right? Of being, of like drawing a big circle and everybody's on the in, rather than kind of like we're so comfortable with our categories and who's this and who's that. But that's the beauty of I think of that.
Yeah.
Which I see in you as a person, right?
Thanks.
It's who obviously it's part of who you are, but
my approach to all of that, I guess, is progressive pragmatism, which not everyone is a fan of, but I think what is the way that I can use my unique situation to create change for the most amount of people. And I don't think, I'm just a guy, I don't think I always get that equation right, but
Sure.
that's always the approach that I've taken and that we took with Welcoming Australia as well, that yes, we need to work towards the utopia that we speak about and believe in, but the people suffering right now can't wait. They need their life to be made better tomorrow than it is today. And, some people prefer to have their ideological purity as an identity rather than as something that's outworked in the real lives of other people.
Wow. And obviously that's led you into many. I'm amazed at the varying roles that you've then played, both in non-profit, within the church, within the business world as a media consultant, even in many respects. And now you find yourself in this brand spanking new role with White Ribbon Australia, the executive director. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure they did a lot of hard work to kind of nail down who would be a good candidate. And but you've been in this role for less than 5 weeks, about a month, right?
We went public relaunch was 5 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I was around for 3 weeks before that.
Okay. So a couple months now, finding your feet, and obviously it's another huge issue of justice, social justice in our culture in Australia that is very needed to address. And what makes this role for you, I guess, so important now that you've stepped into it? And maybe you could tell, for our wider audience who might not be fully familiar with White Ribbon Australia, just explain a bit more about what they do.
Yeah, White Ribbon Australia is a movement to end gendered violence and to advance gender equality, recognising that gender inequality, or the disrespect of women, as expressed in a whole range of ways in our society, creates the space for gendered violence to happen. In Australia, on average, more than one woman every week is killed by their male intimate partner, current or former intimate partner, and police receive a phone call every 2 minutes to be called out to address a family violence situation. And so this is an endemic problem in Australia, in our culture, in the culture of men, and in the way systems respond and approach family violence and gendered violence as well. Um, so for me, I know it sounds a bit naff, but it's people, and people deserve to live in peace and in freedom from violence, and women deserve to live with the same level of power and privilege that I have. And so I was approached by a few people to apply for this role. White Ribbon had a pretty significantly tarnished history and went into liquidation towards the end of 2019. And so I knew that it would take a lot of, and is going to continue to take a lot of work to rebuild trust and reputation for the name White Ribbon. But there was also a real level of goodwill in the wider Australian community, hoping that White Ribbon can become something good and be something good like it was intended to be. What really got me, I guess, over the line to be interested in this role was there was a Brisbane woman named Hannah Clark, and her 3 children were murdered earlier this year by her intimate partner, and it was a horrific public murder, and I think all of Australia was, and even internationally, aware of this situation because of the way that it happened. Publicly in the street, that Hannah and her children being burnt to death by the former partner. And my Facebook and social media feed was full of men in particular saying, I want to make a change. This is not the way it should be in Australia, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know where to go. And, I don't know what to be a part of or where to put my energy. And in the past, White Ribbon would have captured, I guess, some of that energy, but a lot of its reputation in the end ended up being about tokenism and, come to a breakfast, put on a ribbon, say the pledge, all of which are not bad things in themselves. But for me, the bit that was missing was what happened next.
The action.
How do you stand in solidarity with women that are experiencing violence? How do you advocate for meaningful change? How do you be a good bystander that can have conversations that challenge your male friends when they're saying sexist things or treating their partners in unhealthy or coercive ways, and so I really thought there was an opportunity to I guess collect all of those people that wanted to support White Ribbon, but more importantly wanted to see change made and be able to point that in a positive direction and a meaningful direction with clear steps of action to take.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely an issue that I know since moving back here on the Gold Coast is something that's been taken very seriously by a number of even leaders here in the community, which I'm really inspired by. There's some key leaders and even pastors that recognise, hey, even in the church we see that there's often been abuses that have taken place, and using scripture in the Bible can often be used to weaponize and a domineering and approach that really robs women of their dignity and is abusive in so many ways. And so I've been somewhat encouraged too, just learning. Even our mate Brendan here is a part of a board that's really looking at how do we educate. I think they're doing a partnership with Griffith Uni. Maybe that's
actually,
something.
I met with Hayden the other day. When I was in
Hayden,
yeah.
Yeah, Hayden is a great dude. We organised a big. This is a way back when he was obviously part of the band Soulframe. We organised a big event up our way when I was in my youth work chaplaincy days. But yeah, so there's a great recognition, right? Of this is something that we can all do something about. And I think with all these issues that are coming to the surface at the moment, one of the things I'm realizing is the importance of reflection, of listening. So often we can just quickly jump into the argument we think that kind of, suits us, or the echo chamber that we might be surrounded by, but it actually takes a lot of self-awareness and courage to kind of just, hey, let me just take a step back. I mean, you just read some statistics earlier on, which so often can just fly over our heads, and we were like, hang on, every 2 minutes, is that really acceptable? Is that really something that we can kind of bat an eyelid at and think that that's okay? Well done, man, for stepping into it. It sounds like you've got your work cut out for you, but no better man, I don't think.
Thank you.
Maybe let's, obviously there's going to be some challenges. I'd love to kind of end things on a positive note. I'm a pretty optimistic person at worst, and so I'd love to know what hope do you see on the horizon, even as we kind of, when you're in the trenches, often fighting a lot of these difficult situations and fighting to advocate for people, it can be a bit discouraging. But where's your hope lie? Like, what is you see? Where are the encouraging signs for the future? What are ways maybe even you would encourage others to, like, hey, this is what we can get behind? Because I know for me, fear has never led me to really make any significant changes in my life. It's always been when I've been led by courage or compassion, or kindness. The more more in a positive direction. And so I really want to hear from you what that is.
I think in all of my different roles, when people become aware in a personal way of the injustices that exist, they do start to change. And I think that's where hope, for me at least, that's where hope begins. I know that you can kind of get in your little bubble as an activist or an advocate and think that everyone has read the same newspaper articles you have and seen the same story on the project, and surely they must now be as outraged as I am. But actually it doesn't work that way. And so you often feel like, where is the hope? We're shouting into the void here.
Sure.
But where I see the hope comes is when somebody does have the opportunity to have that injustice invade their personal world in some way, whether it's a relationship or or spending time with the right person, or in some way being confronted with the reality in a way that speaks to their heart, then almost inevitably there is change. And so that can still be very frustrating. You wish just the facts would motivate people out of their self-interest, but the reality is that doesn't always happen. But even you mentioning these church leaders getting together to address the gendered violence in your community, or the conversations I have with pastors who are wanting to talk to me about how they can go on a journey of including LGBTIQ people, and understanding that from a faith perspective, or steps faith leaders take to embrace their Muslim neighbours and stand in solidarity with them when there's Islamophobia. in the public narrative. Some of these things are things we wouldn't have seen in the past,
Right.
and while you still can look at the whole big picture and go, bloody hell, we've got a long way to go.
Sure.
You can still see the cracks
Yeah.
open and the light getting through. Actually, there was a sermon I preached a couple of times called Crap We Used to Believe. And where I just go through all the things that we used to defend as people of faith, using the Bible to defend them, like slavery and like not being allowed to dance or not being allowed to drink alcohol or the Crusades or, and these are all things that people would, or, divorced people not being allowed to take communion.
Yeah.
These are all things people would vehemently say, it must be this way because the Bible says it must be.
Sure.
And then today we look at that and go, as if, as if we could believe that. And so that gives me hope because I think it shows that we can listen, learn, love people and be willing to change.
Yeah. When you talked earlier about like the personal experience and you referred to it before, it reminded me of that a quote by Brene Brown, which she says it's hard to hate people close up.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it kind of goes too for when injustice or when things happen to you, when your house is robbed, suddenly you're like, hang on, this is not on like my I feel violated or whatever the case might be. But when the hope is that, as we get closer, as we create those opportunities for people to truly come face to face, I mean, you cannot be indifferent or hate somebody when you, like you said, you see the reflection of your own humanity in them.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for, sometimes the hard experiences of going through injustice yourself can be the opening to, all right, this has got to change. Let's do something about it. I wish we had a lot longer to talk, Brad.
It's all right. We can do it again sometime. Yeah,
for sure. It'd be really good to do it over a couple of beers, and maybe not all this microphone, but this stuff. But mate, is there anything else that you would want to share about maybe how people can get involved with what you're doing? I'd love to just, create that space where you can, kind of point people in the right direction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It'd be wonderful if you would visit welcoming.org.au and get involved with Welcoming Australia. There's work across the country, especially getting local councils to join Welcoming Cities Network.
Yeah.
Local sporting clubs to join the Welcoming Clubs network, and then whiteribbon.org.au. Love to see people join up as community partners, and we've got a plan to start, and people can start community action groups, which is
really, yeah.
I guess how we're reimagining our old White Ribbon committees. It's about how you can bring together all the relevant stakeholders in your local community or your community, faith community, multicultural community, and develop community-led responses to gendered violence and gender inequality. So check that out at the website, and love to see some of your listeners start up community action groups.
Yeah, that sounds great. And what about you personally? Are you on Twitter? Are you on
I'm on Twitter at Brad Chilcott.
Awesome.
And I think it's White Ribbon AUST or Welcoming Oz. Those are the three you can look up.
We'll try and get those in the show notes too, so that you can just get to that. Brad, again, thank you so much. I really, really glad that we could get together to chat, and I won't bother you for a little bit. I'll let you kind of get back to all the hard work you've got ahead of you. Great work. But yeah, be sure to, hopefully there'll be a chance. Some borders, we're closed to everybody, it seems, now in Queensland. We've just gone hard yakka. I can still fly to you. Oh, good. So, we'll definitely make sure we make a chance to catch up. But thanks again for your time, man. I really appreciated it. It's been fun.
Thanks very much.
Well, that rounds out my interview with Brad Chilcott. We certainly covered a lot of ground, but we had the opportunity to actually catch up again here in the studio just last week. He stopped by after having some meetings here in Brisbane and the Gold Coast area, and we actually filmed a promo for his organisation that he's heading up, White Ribbon. They're having a special day called White Ribbon Day, and we filmed a short promo about that campaign that they're holding. And if you'd like to hear more about what they're doing and the organisation he's part of now, you can find that in the show notes. All the various links will be there. And if you want to hear the rest of my conversation that I have with Brad, you can find that over at my Patreon page. Just head on to patreon.com/Justice Matters. As you know, if you've been listening, you can just sponsor this podcast for as little as $1 a month, and you can get access to bonus content material. And I do want to highlight, for $5 a month, you actually get access to all the bonus interviews that I have with my guests. Now, these bonus interviews go for about 10 to, in some case, 15 minutes. Lots more content up there, and it's a bit of a quick fire round, and we actually get into some really, really great and interesting stuff. So you want to make sure you get access to that by heading over to the Patreon page. It's also in the show notes to find out more about that. And now for the credits, I'd like to make special mention of the music artists John Art and David Guncore. They're known as The Brilliants. They provide the music track for this podcast. Make sure you go check them out. And every week, we like to thank Jose Biotto. Mate, you are doing a fantastic job. You've got us through to 11 episodes. He's the masterful audio-visual engineer on this podcast. Really appreciate your work. And lastly, if you're enjoying the show, there's ways that you can rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. Subscribe at the YouTube channel if you'd like to head on over there and actually watch all these podcasts in video. Head on over there and make sure you do that. Guys, thanks so much for joining me this week. Please join me again soon for another episode of Justice Matters. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Thanks for listening.